Very few teams in the NBA have a more excited young core than the San Antonio Spurs. When you look at the San Antonio Spurs, they have the guy that most people proclaim as the future of the NBA. The next face of the NBA, a guy that could be, when it's all said and done, the greatest player to ever play the game of basketball, potentially, in Victor Wembanyama. Everything around this team is on his shoulders. He is the face of the team, and potentially, like I said, in the future, has a chance to be the face of the entire National Basketball Association. But the question has been, was after he already proved himself, and we were well aware that no, he's not just a fluke or a crazy prospect, but this guy is the real deal. Once that was established last season, everything quickly shifted to a standpoint of saying, we're ready to go. He's ready to go. Now, do we get the right pieces around him so we can start to succeed now? Some might have thought it was going to take 2 or 3 years, but after we saw what Wemby's capable of doing last year, we now are well aware that he's ready in a standpoint of his career where he can start to compete today. So San Antonio Spurs had a task at hand now, is to build a team around him and get them ready to compete. And that was what they had to do this offseason. Now, will I say this team is a team that will win an NBA championship this year? No, I do not believe that. Do they have a chance at slipping in maybe into the play-in game or maybe even the playoffs this year? Sure, not out of the question. That really does hinge on how good Victor Wembanyama is this year. But what we do see is a group of guys that has now been built that I think can be a lot more competitive this season, but is a star or a year or two of development away from a team that will be a legitimate contender for years to come. Might I even say they have the potential to be a dynasty in the future. Why do I say that? This offseason was critical from many, many components to this team. And when I look at it, a lot of people saw my rankings for the free agency team rankings a few months ago. I ranked the Spurs quite high. Not because of overall talent that they brought in compared to some teams like Philadelphia and others, but because of the impact of the guys in which they brought in. What do I mean by this? I look at the signings that this team brought in via free agency, and they brought in a key component in Chris Paul, Harrison Barnes, to bring in a veteran mentality to this locker room. I've discussed it with other teams that are in the rebuilding stages. Nothing is more important for a young team than having veterans to help teach them the way. And when you look at the San Antonio Spurs, you brought in a future first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the greatest point guards to ever play the game of basketball, who is still capable of playing at a high level, and Chris Paul. And that is one of the most impactful signings of the NBA offseason. Was he the number one ranked free agent in my book? No. But will he be the most impactful potentially, both this year and what the future holds for the Spurs? Yes. Why do I say that? You drafted a guy in Stephon Castle. You have drafted in recent years other guards like Blake Wesley, Malachi Branham, Trey Jones is on the team. Guys that can just learn from how to be a successful pro, which include Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, Jeremy Sohan, and of course Victor Wembanyama, who will not only benefit from the mentality and learning of a first ballot Hall of Famer in Chris Paul, but will be able to play alongside him in a true point guard that will get him in the right place to succeed this year. Chris Paul was the perfect signing for the Spurs team. I would not have been a fan, in fact, actually, if they would have went and pursued a guy like a Paul George or someone along those lines. This was the perfect dream signing for the San Antonio Spurs, and they nailed it. And beyond Chris Paul, you added another guy that's a very, very respected veteran in the NBA in Harrison Barnes. Harrison Barnes has been in the league for a very long time, has been a starter on playoff teams, has been a part of a successful Golden State dynasty, has been a part of a team that was rebuilt in Sacramento, and ultimately became a team that was a competitive playoff team. He knows winning basketball. He knows how to play at a good level, and he's now a member of the Spurs. Another massive move that they brought in there. And these key pieces all go alongside Victor Wembanyama, and ultimately as well, they go alongside these other young pieces I will address right now. Because this year, the Spurs had another top pick in this year's draft. And they drafted a guy in Stephon Castle, who I look at this draft overall, and yes, the draft was not very stacked top to bottom. We don't know a lot about this draft, a lot of question marks. Stephon Castle, however, was a player that I do like a lot. I say that because I have confidence that when you have a player that was able to win at a high level, especially as a freshman, and win an NCAA championship, and succeed in Dan Hurley's system, then it would be shocking for me at the very minimum for Stephon Castle not to come into the NBA and be able to bring a winning mentality and know how to play winning basketball. Beyond that, I think his potential is very high as well. I think he has a capability of being a very, very good player in the NBA, especially when you put and able to learn from a guy like Chris Paul, learn in a system from Greg Popovich. Those will be critical components for his development, and I love that draft pick by the San Antonio Spurs. Personally, I haven't slotted in right now as a starter for this team. And let me say this as well. The starting lineup for me I have projected right now will be changed. The odds that this lineup is going to be what we even see on opening day or will be what we see 2 months from now isn't the highest. I'll be honest about that. The San Antonio Spurs will have a lot of guys and a lot of rotations and battles they're going to have to battle through in training camp and throughout the duration of the season until they establish that core. But what I have for the starting lineup for the San Antonio Spurs as of today, Chris Paul, Stephon Castle, Devin Vassell, Sohan, and Victor Wembanyama. When you look at this team, ultimately the only guys I say are locked in starters for this season is Victor Wembanyama and Chris Paul. I would say it's very likely that Devin Vassell will also be starting for this team, but ultimately there's a lot of guys you have to see how do they compete, who fits chemistry-wise, who truly is this young core, and who's the foundation of this team. But that's what I've got there. We know Devin Vassell has been in the league for a couple of years, had a good season last year, was injured a little bit, but I really like Devin Vassell. He's going to be a guy that's a very good player in the NBA for a while. And then Jeremy Sohan. A lot of hate went towards him last season. What was being done to him last year was to get him experience and opportunity to grow as a player, to do things that he's uncomfortable with. And I think slotting him now into his natural position of being a power forward or forward essentially is going to be massive for him. And now he can take the things that he grabbed and grasped from last season, his playmaking ability to some extent, his facilitating, whatever that might be, and bring that down to a forward position that's going to make him look a lot better as well. We already know he's a great defensive player as well. So that's going to be a starting five for me as of now. But like I said, don't look too heavily into that. That's something that could easily be changed. If you want to debate that, I have no problem with that. This is not locked in at all. Then you have a secondary here. And the backups for me right now is where a lot of battles are going to continue to emerge as well, both between these guys possibly being starters and also going to have some battles between who's the next first 5 guys off the bench and also guys can be outside of the rotation. As of right now, here's who I have slotted in. Trey Jones, Malachi Branham, Keldon Johnson, Harrison Barnes, Zach Collins. That's your second unit there for me. Now, I alluded to this. Lots of battles to be had here. Blake Wesley could easily supplant either Keldon Johnson or even Trey Jones to be the backup there. He showed a lot of flashes last year. I like him a lot. Who knows? Maybe even takes a starting job this year. I like Blake Wesley a lot. As of right now, I just have him at third string. Like I said, a lot of battles will happen in training camp. Trey Jones is a guy that's already established himself as a very, very good backup point guard in the NBA. Love what he brings to the team. Branham, same situation with Blake Wesley. They could flip-flop right there. Good player. Has had some flash throughout his career, but he's overall mature player. I think he's going to be able to find himself, and I think he's going to benefit a ton from Chris Paul as well. Keldon Johnson's a guy I could see get traded eventually. I don't see him being a core piece of the foundational core here. However, Keldon Johnson is a good player. You could get great value for him, but he's also a guy that we're going to see be a very valuable component to this team as well. The reason I say he's more expendable now is because you brought in a guy, Harrison Barnes, a winning player who could ultimately be dealt as well. I think one of those two will be traded at some point this season. But Harrison Barnes will be a guy that's going to be a perfect backup guy or even starter for this team. If they really want to start the year emphasizing getting the team ready to play good basketball and winning basketball alongside Wemby, Harrison Barnes could be a starter as well. We know what he brings. He's been in the league for a long time. Everybody knows what he brings to the table. I think he was a great addition. Zach Collins, he started for a lot of last season. I think it's time for him to be moved to the bench now. Good player, but I think this backup role for him will be a perfect job for him, what he's really meant to be to carve out a role in the NBA. And then you go to that next unit, kind of a lot of guys in the mix there. Charles Bassey, Sandro's going to be a guy in the mix for that third string center and forward spot. You also have Champagnie. You have Sidi Sissoko. A lot of these guys are going to be in the mix potentially for rotational minutes as well. Like I said, lots of roster battles. When you have a young team, lots of openings available for them. However, that's what I've got kind of rounding out this team top to bottom. Here's where it does get a little bit interesting, though. Two-way has one spot available for the Spurs. Harrison Ingram, David Duke are locked in as of now. Harrison Ingram, I like him a lot. Wouldn't be shocked to even see him get a standard contract by the end of the season. David Duke's a solid pickup as well. But the part I just said that I'm really excited about, they have an interesting mix of guys on E10 deals currently, which are training camp deals. They give you a bonus if you go to play for the G League team. I don't think that's the only emphasis here for the Spurs, though. Malachi Flynn, Brandon Boston Jr., Riley Minix, an undrafted player this season. Specifically, I want to emphasize Malachi Flynn and Brandon Boston. I could see one of these two guys easily attaining a two-way job this in the offseason or in the training camp, but I could even see deeper than that, possibly having David Duke get dropped and bring in Malachi Flynn and Brandon Boston. I think Brandon Boston could even be a guy that's supposed to be in the NBA. He played on the LA Clippers. Not a lot of minutes were given out to young guys there. I think getting him an opportunity to go play could do wonders for his career. Developing the system would be huge for him. And when you talk about this roster, let's say you do trade Keldon Johnson. There's opening then at the forward spot, promote him up and into your team. I love that pickup right there. I'm very interested. Like I said, there's not many teams I'm going to look at more throughout training camp and preseason than the Spurs in terms of how this rotation will be built, who's in, who's out, possible trades. Guys are going to be two-way. There's a lot of battles that's going to be happening in training camp for the San Antonio Spurs. Lots of them. Now, the biggest thing I will say for this team overall, though, is that the weaknesses will obviously be chemistry and experience. They're still a young team, a lot of new pieces. Figuring all that stuff out is going to happen. But there's a big goal plan for the Spurs this season. Make a step forward. Do they look better as a team? And most importantly, do they identify who the core is? We already know Wemby's the core. He's the head of the team. That's not changing. He's Victor Wembanyama. But who's the guy that's going to fit alongside him? Who is it that really emerges that says, okay, this can be a future star as well? This is a guy that fits perfectly alongside him. These two can be a dynamic duo, a big three. Hey, this guy's a key piece to our bench going forward, so on and so forth. Who's the core pieces of the San Antonio Spurs going forward? That's what we really have to look at this season. If you can make a step forward and be competitive, play competitive winning basketball throughout the season, and then also leave the season saying, hey, we know who our core is. We know what we need to address in the offseason. You could be heading into the following season as a team that's a playoff lock. And who knows, depending on how much of a jump Wemby continues to grow and take, you could possibly even be in contender stage. I think that's going to be 2 or 3 years out still. But when you have Victor Wembanyama, who knows how good they're going to be in the foreseeable for the future. So that's going to be interesting to see. That's the biggest things I say for the Spurs this year. Identify the core, make a step forward in terms of winning basketball, and this would be a successful season for the San Antonio Spurs.